Hello, my name is Jaleel Kilpatrick, and today I'll be talking to you about African Americans and mental health issues. Not just about mental health issues, but the stigma around seeking mental health help in the African American community. I started my research by mentioning slavery. Africans were brought from Africa to the New World and endured slavery for over 400 years. I mentioned slavery because I believe it's one of the main reasons why African Americans today, in this new age, experience mental health issues. A couple things about slavery, why I believe that from a generational standpoint, when Africans were brought to the New World, they were experiencing malicious abuse. They were raped. Men were beaten and killed in front of their wives. Children were separated from their families, and this happened out the course of generations from generations. And after a while, we became used to this abuse and learned how to live with the abuse. And because of this, from generation to generation, we experienced great mental health issues. And I believe slavery is the reason it was created, the Negro man we see today. African Americans at risk. African Americans are 10% more likely to experience serious psychological distress. 45% of Black children grow up in poverty and poverty-stricken neighborhoods. African American youth who are exposed to violence are at greater risk of PTSD by over 25%. And African American youth suicide is at an all-time high in our communities. I'm gonna break down each of these things and what they have to do with and how they cause mental health help. Education in our communities. One of the big things in my research that I found that why African Americans suffer from mental health issues is because they don't even know that they have access to mental health help. And my research said that's due to a lack of education. And in urban communities, a lot of minorities, specifically African Americans and Hispanics, have to go or are subjected to these poor schools who have low resources, and because of this, poor education leads to you're more prone to be abusive and try drugs, increased chances of being incarcerated. And according to the U.S. Bureau of Justice statistics in 2013, Black males accounted for 37% of the nation's prison population, which is the highest amongst all ethnicities. I think whites were 32% and Hispanics were 29%. And African Americans think, and because of this lack of education, we see that African Americans think seeking mental help is a form of weakness. Also, dealing with the PTSD, and 25% more likely to experience that in these poverty-stricken neighborhoods. Children from a young age are open and experience malicious and violent acts from gangs, drugs, abusive households, and because of the stigma in the African American communities that mental health is a form of weakness or actually a form of snitching. I've heard from many of my colleagues who are African Americans that they believe that going and talking to a therapist about traumas that happen to them within their own household is a form of snitching. They don't want to get their loved ones in trouble or make it real to a sense. African Americans seeking help. In my research paper, I wanted to answer the question: do African Americans put a negative stigma over seeking mental health help? During my research, I learned that approximately 30% of African American adults with mental illness receive treatment each year, and that's compared to the U.S. average of 43%. I didn't think that was that bad. During my research, I actually found that over the last decade or so, the African Americans, specifically adult males, started to seek more mental health help by going to therapies and in their local communities. And I also, in my research, I found that a lot of times African Americans don't even know that they need help They believe that their way of life is the norm, and since they are forced to live in these communities, are forced to go to these schools, they just believe that this is meant to be. So they don't even know that something is wrong with them. They don't know that there's a better way to live, because how they are brought up from generations, their father and their father, they believe that this is just the way things are. And I also found that in African American communities, they have a distrust and misdiagnosis of what therapy actually is. And I read that historically African Americans have been and continue to negatively affected by prejudice and discrimination in the healthcare system. Misdiagnosis, inadequate treatment, and lack of cultural competence by health professionals cause African Americans to shy away from actually seeking the help that they desperately need. So in conclusion, I would say that the negative stigma around mental health and seeking mental health help in the African American community is alive and well. I believe that over the course of the years that maybe we will try to seek more mental health help, and yeah, I gotta delete that last